The easiest person in the world to manipulate isn't the one who believes everything. It's the one who desperately wants a particular story about themselves to be true. You don't even need to lie to someone like that. You just hand them a reason to believe it, then step back. Their own mind finishes the job. Here's the uncomfortable part. You do this to yourself, constantly. You tell yourself you're waiting for the right time when you're actually afraid to begin. You call it standards when you're terrified of rejection, loyalty when you're afraid to leave, patience when you're hoping someone will finally turn into the person you imagined. And you probably believe every word of it, because your mind was never built to give you an objective account of your life. It was built to keep you being you, and those two goals aren't always the same thing. Psychologists have spent decades poking at the gap between what people do and the explanations they build afterward. Cognitive dissonance is the discomfort that shows up when your actions clash with your beliefs about yourself. And once that discomfort gets bad enough, the mind has to do something about it. You can change the behavior, you can change the belief, or, the easy way out, you can change the story connecting the two. Say someone knows they should leave a relationship. They've been unhappy for months. Their friends can see it. They can see it. They stay anyway, and the mind starts building cover. Maybe it's just a rough patch. Maybe relationships are supposed to feel like this. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe leaving means giving up too easily. Nothing about the relationship changed. What changed is that staying became emotionally tolerable. And once a story like that clicks into place, you stop asking, "Is this true?" and start asking, "How do I make this make sense?" That one shift can eat years of your life. The brain hates contradiction. Believe you're intelligent, but keep making terrible decisions, and there's tension. Believe you're independent, but keep needing someone's approval, and there's tension. So instead of sitting with it, you quietly rewrite what happened. You weren't rejected, they were intimidated. You didn't fail, the opportunity wasn't right. You're not procrastinating, you're waiting for inspiration. Sometimes these stories are even true, which is exactly what makes the whole mechanism so hard to catch. Self-deception rarely sounds ridiculous. It sounds like something you'd say to comfort a friend. There's research on self-presentation showing that people actively manage how others perceive them, and more recent work looking at the gap between people's real selves and the versions they present strategically. But there's a layer under that nobody talks about enough. You're not just managing your image for other people, you're managing it for yourself. Think about the last time you did something you were ashamed of. Your first move probably wasn't to dig into every uncomfortable motive behind it. You explained it. "They pushed me. I had no choice." Anyone would have reacted that way. Some of that might even be fair. The problem starts when the explanation stops being honest and starts being armor. Because once it's protecting your identity, any evidence against it starts to feel like a personal attack. That's part of why changing someone's mind is so hard. You're rarely arguing with a bare fact. You're usually threatening the person they believe themselves to be. Updating an opinion is uncomfortable. Admitting you wasted 5 years, trusted the wrong person, or ignored obvious signs is a different order of cost entirely. Because now you're not defending an opinion, you're defending your history. And people defend their history with real creativity. This is where sunk costs turn into emotional traps. The longer you've stayed somewhere, the harder it feels to admit leaving is right. Because leaving doesn't just cost you the future, it can feel like confirming the past was a mistake. So you stay another month, then another year, telling yourself you've invested too much to walk away, until the investment itself becomes the cage. You're not staying because the situation is good. You're staying because leaving would force you to reinterpret who you've been, which is a much heavier sentence than it sounds. Maybe there's something in your life right now you keep explaining instead of examining. The friendship that drains you, the career you secretly hate, the person whose attention you keep chasing, the habit you keep promising to break. Ask yourself the blunt version. If you couldn't explain this situation to anyone, no history, no excuses, no, after everything I've been through, would you still choose it exactly as it exists today? Part of why that question stings is that people are remarkably good at building explanations after the fact. We like to believe our actions come from deliberate motives, but research on attribution suggests we routinely construct these stories after the behavior has already happened, and we infer traits from behavior almost automatically. One meta-analysis pulling together 86 studies and over 13,000 participants found solid evidence for this kind of spontaneous trait inference. In plainer terms, something happens, and then we build the story about why. We do it to ourselves too. You don't just remember your past, you interpret it, and then you use that interpretation to predict your future, even though the memory can be accurate while the interpretation is completely wrong. Maybe you didn't always fail. Maybe you failed at one specific thing. Maybe you're not bad with relationships. Maybe you kept choosing unavailable people. Maybe you're not lazy. Maybe you built a life around things you never actually cared about. The label is seductive because it compresses thousands of messy events into one clean identity. I'm lazy. I'm unlucky. I'm just like this. And once that identity exists, your brain starts collecting evidence to support it. You stop asking what you should do and start asking what someone like you would do. And your identity turns into a cage with no visible bars. The most dangerous story you can believe about yourself usually isn't obviously false. It's partially true, which is exactly why it's so hard to kill. Maybe you really were betrayed, neglected, treated unfairly. The danger shows up when a real event calcifies into a permanent identity. They hurt me becomes nobody can be trusted. I failed becomes I'm a failure. They rejected me becomes I'm undesirable. One event turns into a prediction. The prediction turns into a belief, and the belief starts shaping your behavior, which then produces evidence that seems to prove the original belief. You believe you're hard to love, so you get guarded. Someone feels that distance and pulls away. You read their withdrawal as proof. The belief created the behavior that created the evidence, and now the whole thing feels undeniable. Self-awareness, then, isn't just knowing your flaws. It's learning to question the narrator, the voice that explains why you failed, why they left, why you can't change. You don't have to hate that voice. You have to stop treating it as an objective witness, because sometimes the voice explaining your life is the same voice trying to protect you from it. Which brings up an uncomfortable question. What would you have to admit if your favorite explanation were wrong? If you always say people eventually leave you, what happens if the real problem is that you keep choosing people who can't give you what you need? If you always say nobody appreciates you, what happens if you've been giving far more than anyone asked for and quietly resenting them for not repaying a debt they never agreed to? If you always say you haven't found your purpose, what happens if you already know what you want and you're terrified of finding out whether you can actually pull it off? The goal isn't to become someone who trusts nothing. That's just a different kind of blindness. It's to hold two possibilities at once. Maybe I'm right, and maybe I'm protecting myself. Maybe they really did hurt me, and maybe I'm using that pain to dodge responsibility for what I do next. That's the actual maturity here. You stop trying to prove your story is true and start asking whether it's useful, accurate, and complete. Oddly, seeing through your own excuses doesn't weaken you. It tends to do the opposite. You stop spending energy defending an identity, and you get that energy back. You don't have to prove you were the victim, or the smartest person in the room, or that your failures were entirely someone else's fault. You can just say, I was wrong. I stayed too long. I was afraid. I made excuses. I hurt someone. Someone hurt me. and now I know more than I did then. That sentence doesn't destroy your identity. It gives you permission to change it. So tonight, when it's quiet and nobody's watching, pick one explanation you've repeated so many times it started to feel like fact. Don't rush to answer whether it's true. Just sit with it for a minute. You might be stuck, or you might just be attached to the story that explains why you should stay that way. And those are not the same thing. If you want to understand the parts of human psychology people rarely talk about, subscribe to SciScholar. And if you're ready to see yourself, and others, a little more clearly, stay with us.